We are back, week 3, day 2, reading through the Bible in 1 year. We are in Exodus. We will be in Exodus this week. We will be in Exodus next week. Hopefully, by the end of next week, we will have a pretty good idea of what Exodus is all about. That's the big idea here. Read through the Bible, right? Quick pace, sharing some thoughts about some things, not other things, just because we have a few chapters. Today we're in chapters 5 through 8, right? So we've got a good amount of material to read through. Are you guys finding the reading to be a lot, too much, pretty good? I don't think it's too much to read. It's too much to talk about everything, but it's not. Excuse me. I don't think too much to really read. So let's look at these chapters 5 through 8, Exodus. We're in the middle of the story now, right? We were introduced yesterday to the situation, to Moses as a character, and now he and his brother Aaron are in the midst of a series of interactions with Pharaoh, who's the king of Egypt. And of course, God has sent Moses. The thought that I ended with yesterday is that often when God acts, he uses us. In this case, in this extended narrative, it's both. God does these acts, these plagues, as we'll see, but Moses and Aaron are the ones who are communicating with Pharaoh. God does not speak to Pharaoh. He speaks through them. They have to act, and they're interacting with God. They're interacting with Pharaoh, primarily Moses with God. So as we jump into chapter 5 here today, in the first verse, Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and they say, "Here's what the Lord." By the way, the Lord. So I have, I should eventually try to find a way to share my screen with you so you can see what I'm doing. That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Maybe one of these days we'll do that soon. The word for the Lord is Yahweh. So this is the personal name of God. This isn't like we've seen like Lord, like people call each other my Lord. Jacob called Esau Lord. We use little l. So it's a little confusing in that way. There's different words. And there's challenges with English translations because sometimes multiple words are translated as one English word. Sometimes one Hebrew word is translated in more English words in different contexts. So there are some challenges there. But the word here in Exodus 5:1 for Lord, usually I think when it's all caps in the translation, it's the divine name. So it's Yahweh. This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, and that's the word Elohim, right? A more generic word. So again, they would have people like Pharaoh would understand multiple different gods. And so Moses is saying Yahweh, the God of Israel, his family line, his nation, his people, says, "Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." So this is interesting because it's, as I'm reading it, right, it seems to be a short-term thing. He's saying, "Hey, let us take a trip." And we're gonna, and with I think the idea, the assumption that perhaps they'll come back then after they do this, right? Let my people go. That's going to be the repeated phrase, right? Let my people go, so that they may hold the festival to me in the wilderness. Verse 2, Pharaoh says, who is Yahweh that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord. I do not know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go. So basically, Pharaoh's saying, I don't know who your God is. He's nobody to me. He's about to become somebody in his situation. So he's not impressed. Pharaoh says, nope, not gonna do it. So get back to work is the refrain from Pharaoh. The refrain from God through Moses and Aaron is let my people go. The word from Pharaoh is get back to work. And he's upset because this stuff is preventing them from working. And we see this idea, a lot of this chapter 5 is kind of filled with this idea of the abusive nature of Pharaoh towards God's people. So his accusation here, Pharaoh, is that, hey, you guys are lazy. That's the problem. So we're going to make it harder. Right? They're already in forced labor, and now it's going to be harder. Verse 9, he says, make the work harder for people so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies. Lies is, of course, from his perspective, what Moses and Aaron are saying from God. Of course, it's not. That's not the key. So Pharaoh's solution is, we'll make them work harder. They got no time to think about anything or plot or plan or whatever, because they're so busy working. So he makes the work harder. Now they have to go out and find one of the raw materials for their bricks, but it used to be provided for them, but their quota isn't any lower. They're expected to do the same amount of work with more work, with more tasks. Yeah, so like verse 17, you're lazy. That is why you keep saying, let us go sacrifice to the Lord. You just want to get off of work. Now get back to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce the full quota of bricks. And so then the people, Israel, the nation, God's people, turn in a sense on Moses and Aaron, right? They say, verse 21, may the Lord look on you and judge. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh, and his officials have put a sword in their hands to kill us. Right? So God tells Moses, hey, you and Aaron, you guys go and kind of call out to Pharaoh, let my people go. And obviously that's hard, it's risky, whatever. And so not only is he rejected, they rejected by Pharaoh, they're rejected by the people because of them. Their work is harder, right? And so they're upset with Moses and Aaron. So this is interesting in verse 22. So Moses, now we have his interaction with God, right? So Moses returned to the Lord Yahweh and said, "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on his people, and you have not rescued your people at all." He says, all right, God, why are you sending me here? It's caused more trouble, and you've not done anything. So, okay, it's good. I love that. Again, we're seeing this, I think, freedom of interaction with God without, until this point at least, without punishment or really even substantial admonishment, right? So God never gets super angry that Abraham earlier or like Moses would question him even. And so I think we're going to see this throughout the biblical story, that there's a difference between kind of calling out, crying out because I don't understand, God, what's happening here. I believe in you, but I'm not seeing it happen. Can you help me, etc. There's a difference between that and what happens with Pharaoh is hardening your heart, right, towards God. So I think that's a different thing, but we'll see that maybe as God goes on, as the story goes on. Okay, in chapter 6 now, verse 2. Let's look at that. God also said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. This is interesting, okay? Right? I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we're remembering we're part of this big story. But I did not make myself fully known to them. Well, that's interesting. And it points a lot towards New Testament Jesus, right? I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan where they reside as foreigners. So this land, we're seeing this land is a big part of the story again and again and again here so far. We'll see if that changes or not and when. Moreover, verse 5, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Remember, we saw this is signal that God's about to act. God's going to do something. Remembering is not just cognition, but it's going to lead to action in the story. Verse 6, chapter 6, verse 6. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with an uplifted hand to give Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. God's swearing by his own name. Nothing greater to make that commitment by, right? So God says, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna redeem you. That's going to become really important when we get later into Exodus. That everything, and we see this throughout the whole Bible, from Genesis to here, when the law comes, and a little bit later in Exodus, and into the New Testament as well. This is not a contrast, but rather a continuity. That God's grace, God's gift, God's redemption comes first, and then the expectation of how we're to live comes in under that. Right? That God never says, hey, do this all first, and then I'll kind of give you something. Grace. It's comes first, and then response, and then blessing flows, kind of in a cycle at that point, right? So he's remembering the covenant, and he's saying, I'm gonna do it. So let's move on here. We got again a lot. Have you noticed just how often that we're chapter 6, like verse 20, no, before that, 6 verse 14, again, we have a genealogy of sorts. It's very important to these authors, right, to remember again and again and again who's included in this group, this family line to which the promises have been given. It's not generally as important to us, right, is it? Feel free to leave comments, questions, by the way, your thoughts as we walk through these things. Chapter 7 now, verse 3. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart. So this hardening of Pharaoh's heart is an interesting thing. It's a theme throughout here. Most of the time, it's said that Pharaoh hardens his heart. He's the agent behind it. At times, it's said that God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. So this has kind of been interesting and kind of puzzling in a sense to people in different times and places. And this theme shows up later in the book of Romans, actually, as well, too. So how the interplay works is something I find it really interesting. Is it that, Pharaoh's committed to this, and so God kind of just gives him over to it, as Romans will say earlier, or is this, more intentionally part of what God wants to happen? It's something to wrestle with as you think about the story. But there it is. And though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. That's what we'll see happening. So God sends Moses and Aaron, and he says, hey, Pharaoh's not going to actually listen to you, but I'm still going to, I'm going to do it. I'm going to redeem you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt in mighty acts of judgment. Moses was 80 years old. I'm in verse 7, chapter 7, verse 7. This is interesting. Moses is 80 years old. I think it's, I need to confirm, but I'm pretty sure this is right. That earlier on, we're told that Moses was 40 at one point. So this idea of 40 years in the wilderness, as he remember yesterday, he left Egypt and he went into Midian, and he got his wife Zipporah and was shepherding, burning bush, all that stuff. 40 years in the wilderness. What else we've seen 40 years? We've seen or 40 rather as a number, not necessarily years, sometimes days. In the flood, the rains, 40. This 40. We'll see later. Book of Numbers, the spies go out 40 days. The wilderness wandering 40 years. I was talking about a little bit about numbers yesterday. Numbers are significant. in the biblical story. And typically 40 is not good. I mean, it's not blessing stuff. I mean, I guess it is in the extent that, they're preserved and whatever through the 40 with the ark through the rain for 40, Moses in the wilderness for 40, but Jesus is tempted in the wilderness for 40 days. But again, that's not a time of like awesome blessing. It's a time of kind of testing and proving faithfulness in the midst of various things. So again, 40, kind of check that and realize that's something that's going on and something to watch for in that. So the plagues, right? The plagues start kind of coming out. I don't really want to talk a lot in depth about the plagues, really. But if you have thoughts yourself, feel free to share them. You see this kind of back and forth with Pharaoh, wanting to, at the beginning, kind of not being impressed. And then as time goes on, more interaction with Moses. But basically, Pharaoh just wants out of the consequences of these plagues. But then once it's done, right, hardens his heart again and refuses to let my people go, right? That's the idea that we're after here today. Frogs, right? So we get to in chapter 8, verse 22. It's hard to say. Moses makes these predictions, so it certainly seems like God's doing this. But in verse 22, he really says, "Here's what's going to be different now. I'll deal differently with the land of Goshen, where my people live. They're going to be protected from these swarms of flies. It's not going to happen there, but the rest of Egypt is going to be. So that now you can know that, right? I'm the God of these people for sure, because I'm going to protect them." And so afterwards, Pharaoh's maybe want to give a little bit. Verse 25, then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, said, "Hey, go sacrifice to your God here in the land." And Moses says, "No, that wouldn't be right." So, all right, I'm going to keep this a little bit shorter today. Share your thoughts, comments, questions about what's going on here in the story, maybe what stood out to you. Do you have any particular thoughts about the plagues as they're coming? But tomorrow, we'll talk specifically about the kind of culmination of the plagues in the Passover, right? This is huge in the biblical story. So read on ahead with an eye to that for tomorrow. Do the reading tomorrow as it's scheduled. And I'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk about tomorrow's going to be a really important day in the story. And then we'll continue on. All right, guys, have a great day.